This episode of the Prestige Junkie podcast is sponsored by DreamWorks Animation's The Wild Robot, written and directed by three-time Oscar nominee Chris Sanders. The New York Times says The Wild Robot is a dazzling triumph of animation in which you feel the filmmaker's attention on every frame. And The Wrap calls it one of the best films in years, a rare cinematic experience. For your awards consideration in all categories, including Best Animated Feature, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Picture of the Year. Now playing in theaters. Hi, everyone. I'm Katey Rich, and this is the Prestige Junkie Podcast. It's Thanksgiving week here in the U.S., and that means if you are a voter in pretty much any film awards body, you are drowning under a pile of screeners of films that you thought you would have caught up with by now. So for me, my weekend plans include finally seeing the Cannes titles All We Imagine Is Light and Seed of the Sacred Fig. And I also plan to catch up on some more episodes of the Peacock series Day of the Jackal, which stars my guest on this week's episode, Eddie Redmayne. But it's also a busy time for awards voters in a totally different industry, and one with a really complicated and interesting relationship to Hollywood as I know it, video games. The annual Game Awards are coming up on December 12th. It's an awards show that's only 10 years old, but has this huge impact on this very, very large industry that I don't know all that well, but my guest does. I've invited my old friend and editor at Polygon and my co-host on the Fighting in the War Room podcast. Hello, Matt Patches.
Hello.
I feel like it's way overdue for you to be on this podcast, but also I'm immersed in film awards and you're immersed in video games, and then we finally have to find a place to meet in the middle.
I think 10 years ago I was more immersed in movie Oscars and Emmys and all that, and now I have evolved. I'm chasing the youth here.
You're still watching movies. Do you have any screeners you're catching up on before we jump into the video game part of it? You've got a screener pile just like the rest of us, right?
I mean, yeah, I watched Night Bitch the other day. I think Amy Adams will... I feel like she is beloved and that she'll sneak in, even though I feel like she's not part of the conversation, the critical conversation.
You did not think I was going to get your Oscar hot takes on this, and yet here we are. So this all started when we took a car ride in New Jersey a couple weeks ago, and you were telling me about the existence of the Game Awards,
which is you did not really know about at all.
No, I guess, and somewhere in my head, I figured that video games would have their own awards, but not that they would have only been around for 10 years, because video games have been around much longer than that. And that was sort of what I found fascinating about it, is that a new award show can emerge. People talk all the time about how the Oscars are kind year old and fussy.
Yeah, what year of the Oscars are we on? We're getting up to the 90s, right?
Yeah, okay. I think. Oh, yeah.
Getting to 100.
It's just a couple. Yeah, getting toward 100.
What a show
so the Game Awards are 10 years old, but they are not only important, but like the way you were telling me about it is that they've become more important. Like they're kind of taking this place in this world that is really broad. Like, you know, the nominees can be like a card game or also The Last of Us and everything in between. So like the idea of coming up with awards for this at all seems really complicated. So, I mean, maybe to start with, you guys just started covering this really in depth at Polygon this year. And like people really seem to want to learn about the Game Awards, right?
I think that's right. And yet there is hefty skepticism and pushback in a way that I think we see every single year with the Oscars, where it's like, why do we need to cover awards? Why do we need to talk about it in this way? Why does this industry exist? Can't we just love the art? And I think you and I both believe, yeah, we can love the art, and that the awards conversation can even fuel the love of art and direct people to types of movies that they wouldn't watch.
The art.
Yeah. And I think there's a belief at Polygon, certainly, that if we started taking the awards conversation more seriously, the excitement around the horse race, that we could actually lead people to games they've never heard about, or get games in front of people that they may not have considered for awards and to put apples next to oranges in a way. As you said, this year's nominees at the Game Awards include Astrobot. It's the biggest AAA PlayStation game of the year. It's like their Mario equivalent.
What does AAA mean?
AAA is like the biggest big studio movie. It's like it's a huge tentpole.
It's like Deadpool and Wolverine.
Sure, yeah. I mean, when we're talking about games versus movies, it's hard to make that total equivalence because it's not necessarily like fluff in that way. There's prestige versions of that versus like it's not like Deadpool and Wolverine getting a Best Picture nomination necessarily. It's like Gladiator 2 or Wicked.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right.
But then you have Balatro, which you referenced, is this card game made by one person. It was a single developer game that's a riff on poker, and that has just kind of swept up critics and swept up players, and it's become a huge phenomenon, and that cracked Game of the Year main category. So yeah, there's lots of different types of games that can sneak in, and how they do so is very similar to the conversation about Oscars. How do things gain momentum, popularity, and then how do they get voted on? So I want to dial back here for a second. Yes, the Game Awards have been around for 10 years, but the Game Awards evolved out of a different show. It used to be the Spike TV Game Awards. Okay, do you remember Spike TV, where it used to be G4, which had a lot of video game programming on TV, and they started doing their own show. And then that ran for 10 years, actually, and it petered out in 2013.
Like, emerged like the MTV, like the VMAs. Like yes, imagine if the birth of this.
Yes, imagine if the MTV Movie Awards spawned the Oscars. That is not too far off from where we are. And this guy, this journalist who became a PR person, Jeff Keighley, he is at the center of the Game Awards and wanted to continue on after Spike TV flamed out. And he's the reason this show exists. In a way, it's almost like he's kind of like a Dick Clark type. He's like, I'm going to become my own TV industry or for the games, and he's putting on this show, and he's at the center of it, and that becomes very complicated.
He hosts it every year, right?
He has hosted it every year and continues, and that becomes really tricky. But I should say, like, similar to the movie awards, there's other types of award shows. There's the Game Developers Choice Awards in March, which is more of people who work in the gaming industry, developers who are creating the games. They vote on it. There's the DICE Awards, which is fueled by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, which has prided itself in being the Oscars of games.
That sounds very Oscar-y.
Before the Game Awards has turned around. But there's so much politicking right here, right? Like the Game Awards is debuting. It's on December 12th. It's ahead of the curve. It becomes a bigger, flashier show, and something that has elevated it is not only is it a stage for awards honoring the biggest in games that year, but it is also a platform, and this is what Jeff Keighley has become very good at debuting new games and new trailers for games. And it is as much of a Comic-Con event as it is a Oscars event equivalent. And by doing that, it has demanded attention from the people who care about games. Everyone wants to watch the Game Awards because they don't necessarily need to see Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree win Game of the Year. They also want to see the new trailer for Grand Theft Auto 6, the most anticipated game of next year. And that is what Jeff has been able to do and grow over the last 10 years. It has become much, much bigger and much more significant because it is a platform for both honoring games and showcasing new ones, captivating the audience. And it's something the Oscars have not really figured out in 90 plus years. In fact, you tell me, weren't there a lot of rules kind of banning ads and advertising during the Oscars?
And I should know this better, but yes, I do believe there was like rules about like how you could show trailers for certain movies.
I think Disney started kind of, you could see a trailer or you could have Melissa McCarthy come out and be like, I'm going to be in Little Mermaid next year. And here goes to the VFX award or whatever.
Yeah, or like Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt presenting us a tribute to stunt men, which happened to be when The Fall Guy was coming out.
But that's a lot different than like, and here's the Endgame trailer.
Yeah.
Which would get a lot of people to watch the Oscars.
That's very VMAs, right?
Sure.
Like, or like the movie awards, I guess, used to be in the spring, and because that was when like all the trailers for all the summer movies could be there and they could promote all of that stuff. Like there's that that method of promoting something within a award show feels kind of like old fashioned, right? It's like, everyone wants to see it on TikTok and they want to see the ads on YouTube. They don't need to see it on an award show. But the Game Awards are proving that, like, no, people will tune in to see previews of something. Like, the kind of the old fashioned version of it still works.
It's super funny to think that we spent like 2 years wondering, or the Academy spent 2 years being like, should we add a most popular movie category? Like, that's not the answer. The answer is put next year's most hyped movie into your show somehow.
And there's a version of like, what if they had shown a sizzle reel for Conclave during the Oscars? Like, not the hottest movie of the summer, but like, you know, like last year, like being like, hey, Oscar watchers, here's a movie that you're probably going to like. Like, they showed a version of it at CinemaCon, like not that long after the Oscars. Like, these things could be possible. Because do the Game Awards previews, are they always like, here's the stuff that's going to be a little prestige-y that will fit the games, or is it absolutely everything?
I mean, there's a lot of behind the scenes, like how much will you pay for a slot at the Game Awards chicanery. Maybe that's a rude way of putting it. It's business. But it's like, you know, who gets what slots and how. It's like the Super Bowl in terms of advertising. So nothing that you see during the Game Awards is not paid for, you know, and that they don't spend so much time toiling over like who's going to get the primo slots. But lots of people try and squeeze in. So you just have like 50, 60 trailers premiering during this show.
50 or 6? How
you have to
long
understand
is
that this broadcast, I mean, the show is as long as, it's probably like 3-some hours. Okay. But like a lot of it is, certain categories will be announced, the winners will be announced via scroll. And then you will have like 4 debut exclusive trailers. Like you're in Hall H at Comic-Con. It is very surreal. And this has created a lot of tension with the idea of taking the awards seriously. Like, why are we giving oxygen to the Game Awards when all they care about is the next games? They're not spending enough time honoring them. And yet the same people who are upset about that are also like, why are you covering them at all? Why are you trying to make them more important? And the reason...
Well, why are you?
And the reason is because Jeff kind of won, I think, and that he did it. He made the show that can be Oscar-level eventized. And I, you know, the conversation will continue into next year. The BAFTAs is also really important on the gaming side as well, and that'll happen next spring.
Wait, the BAFTAs, like the British Academy?
Yes.
Are they a separate award, or they handed out like with like Best Actress? Like,
No, they're a different show, but they're all in around the same time. And if you are a BAFTA member of the games, you get screeners for the BAFTAs. So, and I think you get to vote on all of the BAFTAs. So that's
like as if the Oscars had a video game spinoff.
And maybe they should. Maybe they should come in and really
British
start butting
Academy
heads.
Games Awards. I cannot believe I didn't know this existed.
Yeah, but the big reason they're becoming more important is because as the show grows, the direction that the Game Awards can still grow is with integrity. It can grow by becoming a better award show with a more interesting conversation. I mean, bigger names are appearing at the show on top of the developers. As talent becomes, you know, Lea Seydoux is in Death Stranding and Death Stranding 2 on the beach, your favorite games from Kojima, Katey. And Lea Seydoux was at the Game Awards. Or like the other year, Al Pacino showed up to give out the Best Actor or Best Performance Game Award. And he took the stage and was like, I don't play video games. I don't know. The kids tell me I should have come to the Game Awards.
Why am I here?
What am I doing here? But I got an award for you. And it's spectacle and it's fun. And but giving out the awards, we're trying to take it to another level because I think the show itself has demanded the attention by becoming the focus of who gets to win Game of the Year, which is its own conversation beyond the Game Awards themselves. The people who play games love to think about what will the Game of the Year be. So the Game Awards has become so influential that it is all knotted up in the conversation around Game of the Year. So we know that people want to have that conversation. And we know that it's important to the business. So I think what else is interesting about the growing influence of the Game Awards and just like a gaming awards season conversation is for similar reasons to Hollywood. You know, we always talked about if you could win an Oscar, like why did Harvey Weinstein want to win an Oscar? Right? Like, it's an Oscar
Why does Ted Sarandos still want to win an Oscar?
It's good for the business on some level. And back in the day when everyone went to the movie theaters, you could get the Oscar bump in theaters. Now maybe it's less important, but if Anora wins and Neon sold a deal to Hulu for a ton of money, then Hulu gets the Best Picture winner of the year on Hulu, and the brand and the streaming service is more important. I think platforms have something to gain from the Oscars, and platforms have something to gain from Game of the Year and Game Awards. Like, Game of the Year goes back to, you could slap that on a box in 1998 and people would buy your Game of the Year edition of a video game. And now it's more like, well, Xbox Game Pass is a platform equivalent to Netflix. So they want you to subscribe and go play the games of the year in different categories and be able to parade that around. What was so interesting and a spark for our coverage this year was earlier in I think March, Xbox and Microsoft closed down 4 studios that were making kind of like medium to indie level games, not these AAA big tentpoles, but like they acquired a bunch of studios and then they shut them down. And this was pretty controversial because no one wants to see the industry collapsing and condensing like that. But then the day after they shut down those studios, this guy, Matt Booty, who's the head of Xbox Game Studios, held a meeting with the team that said, we actually need smaller games because they give us prestige and awards. That's the direct quote. And I found that really interesting that we need awards to bolster the platforms, that it gives it a glow. And this is a very foreign concept to even talk about the Game Awards as if they matter or winning Game of the Year matters, which is why we're in an interesting spot covering them in this way and scrutinizing them through our columns. But it clearly means something to the industry and will grow in significance as platform wars become the thing. Will people subscribe to Xbox Game Pass for a whole year? Well, you need something every month to be able to do that, and award winners can actually increase the value. So whether or not people care about the Game Awards or ever have before, which in the 10 years they've been around, I don't think they really have. And there's a lot of skepticism over buying into like the Jeff Keighley Awards, as many people will be rude about and call them that.
I wish the Oscars had like a single figurehead that everyone could just yell about.
And I think the Game Awards will hit a wall with one person being so tied to it that like it will grow in significance. You might watch the Game Awards if Hugh Jackman hosted the Game Awards or something, like if there was more permeation with other realms, or if they got out of their little niche bubble of Jeff Keighley is someone we can email. He's he's tied to the game media industry. And this is something we haven't really talked about, but the people who vote on the Game Awards are journalists.
Yeah, it's more like a critics group than the Oscars, really.
It's like a big critics group from all over the world, which is interesting. So it's more maybe like the Golden Globes, I'm realizing. Woof. But there's also...
With more people, it sounds like.
And as you saw, there was a 10% of the vote is a fan vote. So you open the door to regular people to influence, and this will have an effect, maybe not a major one, but so I was mentioning the Game of the Year nominees. There are games in there that I think people raised an eyebrow at. There's this game, Black Myth Wukong, which is a big fighting game, Chinese game. And it's been a bit controversial and not well loved by critics. But there's a very strong contingent, and it's a little wrapped up in culture war stuff. I'm not going to unpack this whole thing. Boy. But you could imagine that if in this year, this is a particularly interesting year for the Game Awards because there's no clear front runner. There's no Zelda Breath of the Wild, a game that you've actually heard of. But there are a lot of games that could split the critical vote. I think, like Balatro, beloved by like an indie darling, or Astrobot, a really easy, fun game that a lot of people have played. Obviously, these nominees are dependent on like how many people actually played all the games this year. How many critics get in a room and say, what can we all decide is the consensus pick that we're going to vote on this year as an organization? The same reason
that like we're all drowning in screeners, is that like everyone wants to be the movie that everyone has seen.
And then the question is, how much does a 10% fan vote then influence? If Black Myth Wukong voters, if the culture war contingent is like, we're putting our finger on the scale and we're going to just like dump votes for this game, will it split the vote? Will this game sail through because of the preferential ballot?
Too? The fans get to have that 10% in the winner also?
In the winner?
Like, do they determine the nominees and the winners?
They don't determine the nominees. They do determine the winners.
Oh, I thought they determined the nominees. Yeah. Okay, I see. So then how does this game that critics don't like wind up in that list in the first place?
Because enough people
it's such a widespread thing?
Did like it because it's an international voting body. There's Asian outlets. There's European outlets. There's everywhere.
Yeah.
And so it becomes this is something that I think the Oscars are actually reckoning with. Can there be more can-flavored picks breaking through into major categories because of an international voting base?
Yeah, can you expand your membership to the point that it actually more broadly represents?
And we're like already there
cinema.
with the Gay Awards.
Yeah.
And yet no one thinks like that's because everyone's just like, just show me trailers, or I don't respect you for even having awards at all. I just feel like we're in this proto-conversation about gaming and the award conversation that is so 20 years, 25 years ago, 30 years ago about the Oscars, where it's like, what is the worth of this show? It's like, I guess we do.
But do you
we'll do
think
this forever.
that gamers can come around to the idea that, like, even if the Best Picture winner doesn't match up with what you think is the best one of the year, it's still like a worthwhile thing? Or is it all
I think that's part
like
of our
binary?
quest too, to say, you know, Polygon will run our own Game of the Year list in December.
And
we'll
people
have our
read
picks.
those, right? Like everyone, even if you want to just disagree with it, everyone always looks those up.
Those matter to people, and those matter to companies as well. Like people want to. That's how people used to get a Game of the Year sticker for their boxes. They have to actually be a Game of the Year. Media, it still matters. And then we'll have conversation like. And we've bifurcated the awards conversation. It has nothing to do, and people have been very confused over why, when our correspondent, Ollie Welsh, is talking about the calculus behind picking the winners, predicting the winners. He has gone through all the Game of the Years over the years and seen like what type of games, strong narratives, like fantastical characters and strong world building. Like,
is there just a bias, like a snobbery about thinking that they are just too popcorny?
Yeah, I think there is different types of bias, and because of the categories, the same reason like animated movies might struggle to get a Best Picture nomination because of the existence of a Best Animated category. I think there's a lot to see in the constellation of what could get nominated, how do things get nominated, and what has won in the past. And when Ollie has really dissected that for people, there's immediate confusion. Well, why didn't you include Call of Duty? I love that game. And it's like, oh, we haven't even had this conversation in the game space before. It's amazing. Like we don't have like the award literacy with people yet. And I'm sure we run into this with the Oscars too, but it's so well known that like how that works and how it's not representative.
The most popular movie of the year is not going to be necessarily be the Best Picture nominee over and over again.
Like it's such a seasoned conversation, but it's so new to the game space. But already there's even 10 years into the Game Awards or 20 into the Spike TV Game Awards. We know what the patterns are, and it's interesting how it's evolving. But it's the conversation to even consider that there could be patterns is brand new.
This is a real can of worms question I was thinking about as you're talking. Like, obviously, video game fandom has been known to have its people who are arguing in problematic ways, as have movie fans. And I don't know that the Oscars, like, fix that in any way. I don't know that it's going to keep, like, the Snyder Bros from, like, you know, when the Flash entering the Speed Force won a fake Oscar. I don't know that made any of that toxicity
That was
go
important
away.
to me, personally, actually.
I know it was. I know. You've been thinking about that a lot. But, like, is there, like, a pressure release valve or something of having awards be structured for this? Like, people are going to yell at each other about video games forever, but if they can all focus energy toward these awards, whether they're right or they're wrong, does like that help the way that people talk about video games in any way?
I think having the conversation creates that literacy that we can say, these are these awards and these are your favorites and these are our favorites. It does.
And they are not, they do not have to be the same thing to be valid.
It doesn't have to be the same thing. And there's no... And we've had that question come up in our comments and in reactions to our stories where it's like, why do we allow the Game Awards to steer a conversation and to suggest that these are the best games of the year? And if for anything, they suggest that they're not, and that there are many more, and then the conversation can erupt around what they got right and what they got wrong. You know,
it gives you like a structure.
This year we got to talk about snubs, Katey, about gaming snubs. That phrase has never been written on the internet before, and it's been so fascinating to see. Like, there was a major release this year, Dragon Age: The Veilguard. This is a game that's been 10 years in the making. The previous installment of the game won Game of the Year. The year it came out. There's a new installment of it. It just came out. It got completely shut out of the Game Awards. It's just not loved enough. It's not polished enough. It just didn't have... Even it's like a performance-centric big tentpole game, and none of the performers got into that category. So it's really interesting to consider, like, that as a snub and like why that happens, because it has a really passionate fan base, and to be able to talk about like why it didn't and how culture around our entertainment, it goes beyond the text, right? It goes beyond our critical preferences around the text. Something enters into the mainstream and different people have different reactions, and it might like come out at the wrong time, or it might come out too late. You know, this is 10 years of development on this game. Like, why didn't it follow through? Like, it didn't have the momentum. Those conversations,
there's always a lot of factors that go into those
understanding
things.
why the stuff that you engage with isn't the biggest thing on the planet, or instead of being conspiratorial, people are hating this game for this reason. No, it just missed the mark because of this. And I think it clarifies people. I think the awards conversation clarifies how art moves through the real world of business and cultural conversation.
Do you think that art inevitably leads itself toward awards in some way? As stupid as it feels to be like, this was the best piece of art of this year, because it's all subjective, that there's just like something about human nature or like media's nature or whatever it is. It says like eventually like an award show is going to come out to sort all of this.
I think it does, because you ultimately spend the end of your year thinking about like what you did. And as soon as you reflect, you want to know like what accomplishment means. And it's good for the games industry to be able to celebrate the work, because I think so much of it, you made a joke before we started recording that Fortnite is in the mix for maybe ongoing game. There's a category at the Game Awards for ongoing game.
Sure.
And this is where the Game Awards becomes part Emmys as well, because it's like there are different seasons of games that are always on. So you could have games that have been around for 7 years and they're getting nominated again. What could have changed? Well, a lot changes in Fortnite every year, multiple seasons, right? So like, was that an accomplishment to think about how they've improved on games every year, and how maybe some years they miss the mark and some years the devs go back and create something brand new and fix those problems and advance the story or the play. I think the awards ultimately lead to, or the reflection on games ultimately leads to giving awards, because you want to celebrate the craft and the accomplishment. And there's not a lot of space to do that when you're just warring on Reddit about like what's good and what's not, or what's selling and what's not. I actually think it takes a lot of something that bothers me about games and movies a lot of time, commerce talk. This movie made a lot of money. This movie didn't. This movie, like, you can start talking about different types of spaces and use different metrics of success to talk about whether it's games or movies or anything. I think awards helps that conversation, at least nuances it. So,
do you think that the Game Awards in general, like, get the art part of it somewhat right? Like, that, you know, they got the commerce down, but like, are they acknowledging the art at least enough to make it feel like it's a valid representation of, you know, how video games can be art?
I mean, I think they've done that in terms of categories and creating spotlights.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting categories in there. Like, they have them for indie games, they got them for performances. Like, they do a good job like finding different ways to recognize a lot of stuff.
I think people raise their eyebrow at the genre delineations that we have: best action adventure and best action. And best fighting, and, you know, and family game. What is a family game? And how are they?
Best esports team? I don't even like. Is that like
it gets deep.
What does that mean?
Yeah, there's a whole other section where you're celebrating athletes.
Fine. All right.
There's an ESPYs part of the Game Awards as well. And there's a content creator. But no, it gets messy, and I think where the Game Awards need to grow are giving those. You know, we had this drama with the Oscars, what was it, 2 years ago, where it's like, we need to buy back some time here. Let's just kind of give awards out during the commercial breaks and show a quick highlight reel. The longer the Game Awards scrolls through winners in categories like Best Art Direction, the less it will matter. Now, does the audience want to see that? I don't know. Like, I think they need to improve on the ways that they celebrate the art. They can't just hand out awards and give out the trophies.
They also need to acknowledge the artists, you know? Like, the people who win the Best Art Direction, like, clearly these companies care about these awards, so you've got to give them the acknowledgement as well.
But this year, there was a bigger conversation about, like, game direction. Best game direction and game of the year. All 6 of the nominees match. Now, we've had that problem in the Oscars for a long time. That's changed.
I don't know if I would agree it's a problem, but yeah, okay.
That they match completely?
Yeah, like sometimes it makes sense for them to match. Well,
it's a problem from a show me more winners and show me more movies perspective.
Give me more opportunities.
For me, it's not a logic issue like, they would kind of be the same a lot of the time. Like, where would you draw the line between direction and the overall, like, confluence of all the elements in a film to call it the best picture? But I think the Oscars has somehow convinced people to break up the nominees and celebrate different types of films and filmmaking in those categories. And the Game Awards is just too new. It just hasn't done that. So there's a lot of overlap and it's a lot of sameness. And until you get either more voters or more conversation happening around this is where I think the awards conversation about movies has been good. I think it's influenced voters to think about what it really means to be the best director, or what it means for a screenplay not to line up with the director and not to line up with the best picture all the time. There's a lot of conversation happening around, like, who could win and how to go deeper and how to really think about what to celebrate, the way that comedy has infiltrated the Oscars more seemingly over the last few years. I think that's been a push from the conversation sometimes.
Sure. Question maybe to wrap up. How many video games do you think are published in a year?
Oh my God.
That would be, like, eligible for these
hundreds and
awards?
hundreds and hundreds. I mean, technically, if you go on Steam, where you can play PC games, or you go on the, like, Switch store, the Xbox store, it's not just these, in terms of AAA, like, big studio games.
Sure.
There might be 10s, 20s, 30s over the course of the year, more, probably closer to 100, but, like, there are so many games. There's so much innovation happening. There's so many games that are just like click 2 buttons and do a thing. Like, we could be talking about Wordle. We could be talking about connections. We could be talking about, like, there's all sorts of types of games happening. And I feel like this is true of the indie film space as well, where it's like, there's too many movies. There's too many games.
Yeah, but also it just, like, takes, like, you're talking about, like, one person developing a game. Like, the movies cannot work that way. I was, like, just looking at, like, 2022, or 301 feature films eligible for Best Picture. So, like, that feels like way fewer than the amount of games that are eligible here. It's like, that's another way that the sorting is just so much to deal with.
The messiness of the Game Awards, and this, I don't think we can say if it's a good or bad thing, but with games, there are games that came out this year, like Hades 2 or Rogue, Prince of Persia, that are in early access. That means they're not done, but you can play them.
Oh.
And they have come out.
Are they eligible for the awards?
They are, technically.
Oh.
Everything is eligible for the awards. Or Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree is actually an expansion, but it is technically not a new game. It's an add-on to the old game, and it is nominated for Game of the Year. Now,
and we don't agree with that.
I do agree with that, because I think it's like enough work. I mean, here's the thing. Voters agreed on it.
Sure.
Everyone thought this was enough of a work of art.
And you vote on this, right? Polygon votes on these awards.
I personally don't, because I don't want to be involved with and get mess. I've decided to be on the awards side of the conversation. So I let our Illuminati at Polygon do the voting. But
no one lets me vote for the Oscars either.
Yeah, they should not let me vote for anything.
They should let me vote.
But yeah, it's interesting, like the blurriness and the what's eligible and what's not, like it's all on the table. So it really just follows like what feels like an accomplishment, and can enough people rally around those things to create sound nominees. And it could get messier in the future if there's not more lanes. I don't know. The Oscars has found more lanes, but then the Oscars has evolved. They used to have black and white cinematography versus color cinematography.
They evolved, but slowly. I mean, adding a casting category took years and years and years of work, and they've like really hovered around like 24, 25 categories, like forever. And I think that's part of their power, right? Like their Critics' Choice Awards have like Best Young Actor under 21, good for them, but the Oscars are never going to do that kind of thing.
Do you think that the Oscars would benefit from some of the Grammys playbook? The Grammys is constantly changing and adding categories and like deep genre benches, and like lots of people win Grammys. Not on Grammy night, but like lots of people win Grammys. Would that be better for the Oscars? Or
I don't think so. I think there's a lot of awards out there. Like there's the WGA Awards, the PGA Awards, Critics' Choice, Golden Globes, like AARP, Movies for Grown Up Awards. Everyone has a chance to be considered in a lot of different ways. I think the Oscars have a power of being really old and being really selective and making it really hard to get into that list of 5 production design. And you don't have, like the Emmys have a gazillion Emmy categories. And like, I think that works for them. A lot of people win Emmys, not on Emmys night. There's daytime, all of that. But like movies, as you know, it's even if they're kind of not as popular an art form as video games anymore, like they're still a really specific thing, and the Oscars have a specific thing they do with them. So I think they have power in that.
Yeah, and I think you asked me this question off the podcast, which was, can young people get on board with, is the Game Awards too late? I mean, I don't know. I think the word is still out if like mass audience cares about awards thinking at all.
Yeah.
I think they like yelling about things, and I think they like thinking deeply about what they care about. So I hope there's always a place for an awards show. The benefit of the Game Awards is that it streams on Twitch and YouTube. You don't have to watch it on or figure out how to have ABC on your device.
That within the next couple of years, when the Academy contract with ABC is up for renegotiation, we will be able to fix that. I feel pretty confident.
But I do wonder if the bargain with the devil that Jeff Keighley has made to always be a platform for new flashy trailer stuff, which makes people groan, some people,
but also gets attention,
is also the reason that it will prevail and be watched, and that ultimately people will sit through the awards part, and maybe that can be more interesting. And that's where I worry about the Oscars losing relevancy, because they're trying to solve the problems through the voters and through the categories. And I'm like, there's more structure, I think, to the Oscars to save, which is where it's streaming and what's playing between bits.
Yeah. I mean, that's also reliant on like the old TV models that are like way more complicated than the Oscars themselves.
I also think there should be more fan voting during the Oscars. We need more Flash enters the Speed Force.
You want more Flash entering the Speed Force.
So that does not diminish the actual awards.
It doesn't, but it was just so pointless.
So
it was like,
awesome.
Because I think that was the same year that they had the awards during the commercial break. So it was like, oh, so Riz Ahmed has to win his award during a commercial break, but you need to take time for the Flash entering the Speed Force? Like, make a choice here.
This is the bargain this is how the Game Awards feels. This is what people get frustrated over.
Yeah, but this is also why the Oscars just need to go on Netflix or Twitch or whatever and be 4 hours long and everyone be fine with it, which I would love and everyone else would probably hate, but that's how you do it. You have the freedom of outside of a broadcast contract, and you can do what you want.
Are you going to watch the Game Awards this year? What was your game of the year, Katey?
You
played a game, at least one.
I played a lot of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So like those are a little out of date. Yeah. And Stardew Valley.
Stardew Valley got a huge update. That was eligible. Okay.
Oh, okay. I didn't see it nominated for anything. New games are not a priority in our household, I will say. I will say the Minecraft movie trailer is now we're really getting this really
could
sounds
be
like
up for
a
best adaptation at the Game Awards next year.
My kid's already speculating about what Oscars it might be eligible for, and they asked if there's a popular movie Oscar. It's like, not anymore. I'll have to. They're not ready to learn about effects? The Flash entering the Speed Force. We'll have to get there. No, maybe I'll play Balatro. Can I play that like on my web browser?
You can now play it on your phone.
Amazing.
You will love
that sounds fun. I like a card game.
Our fellow friend and podcast host, David Ehrlich, is addicted to it because he loves poker.
That sounds like he loves card games on his phone and poker. I want you to tell me the highlights of the Game Awards. And maybe I'll add it in the newsletter for anyone who hears this and wants to hear how it all goes. And you have to tell me how it works
I'm gonna be on the ground. I'm truly living my award season dream this year.
So you're going to LA
I'm going to LA for the Game Awards. Wow. I'm planning on just being like an insider, things I'm hearing from the floor.
That's exciting.
It's going to be fun.
You're going to be at the Peacock Theater?
Theater.
That's like attached to the Staples Center, right? That's where that one is?
I believe you.
I cannot wait. I cannot wait for you to go a full award season for the Game Awards. I'm very excited for you. Thank you for explaining all this to me.
My pleasure.
You're at Polygon. People can mostly just read pieces you've edited about this, but hopefully learn a lot more about it over there. And I definitely did.
Excellent. Thanks.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and then I'll be back with my conversation with the star of the Day of the Jackal, Eddie Redmayne. This episode of the Prestige Junkie podcast is sponsored by DreamWorks Animation's The Wild Robot, written and directed by 3-time Oscar nominee Chris Sanders. The New York Times says The Wild Robot is a dazzling triumph of animation in which you feel the filmmaker's attention on every frame. And The Wrap calls it one of the best films in years, a rare cinematic experience. For your awards consideration in all categories, including Best Animated Feature, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Picture of the Year. Now playing in theaters. When I was preparing for this conversation with Eddie Redmayne, I was kind of flabbergasted to realize that between his 2 performances as the MC in Cabaret, first in London and then on Broadway, he took on this role as the mysterious sniper in Day of the Jackal. It's a British series now airing on Peacock. It was just recently renewed for a second season. And it's this very polished spy thriller that follows a kind of cat and mouse game between Redmayne's sniper character and Lashana Lynch as the MI6 agent trying to catch him. It's based on the 1970s novel that was also turned into a very famous movie, but it also feels really modern with all its country hopping and spy technology. And it also just looks really hard to make, not only for all the locations that it's shot in, but also the physical qualities of Redmayne's performance. He's always donning these disguises so he can travel across all these borders as the Jackal, and also holding this incredible stillness as the sniper taking these shots. Redmayne has become famous for these kinds of physical transformations. He won an Oscar for playing Stephen Hawking in The Theory of Everything, of course, and his MC in Cabaret had some real physical distinctive characteristics. And I imagine that when you're on a break from a challenging musical like that, with two kids the same age as mine at home, that you might want to take a break. But that is definitely not Eddie Redmayne's speed, as you will hear in this conversation. He got really refreshingly frank about what the last 10 years have been like since he won that Oscar. He not only took on a big franchise in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, but he really thought about what he wants to do and what it means to suddenly be an actor who not only doesn't have to audition, but can get stuff made and stuff he feels really strongly about. We also talked about having kids at home, figuring out when to work and when not to, and also how not going to drama school kind of changed his approach compared to other actors his age. He's always a real pleasure to speak with, and I think to listen to as well. So hear my conversation with the star of The Day of the Jackal, Eddie Redmayne. Well, I was fascinated when I realized with the timeline, I think, that you made Day of the Jackal basically in between cabarets. You had done it on the West End, you had this break, you made the show, and then you went back and played the MC again. Is that timeline right?
That timeline is right. Yeah, it is.
So was that I need a break from this guy and to do something else? I know, control over your schedule is not easy, but that seems like a very interesting kind of sandwich in between those two productions of Cabaret.
It was an intense thing to jump between. But there had been a moment, weirdly, when I was doing Cabaret in London. And what's interesting when you do theatre is lots of extraordinary people come to see it. Mm-hmm. And I sort of met politicians and musicians and actors and members of the royal family, and all these people would come and see the show, and then you get to meet them afterwards. And I suddenly had this idea of an actor, kind of a theatre actor who was actually some sort of spy or something and was using his access to all these people and changing the way he looked and changing the way as an idea for a show. And then it was weirdly like I was sort of manifesting the Jackal, because these scripts arrived and it was all of a much better version of that idea.
Well, there's, of course, also this common thread between Cabaret and the Jackal where there's this intense physicality to this, and that's something you've done a lot. You have this movement coach who I think you said you first started working with on The Theory of Everything and came back with this. Is that an ongoing relationship that you've had? Did you, meet this person on Theory of Everything and say, oh, okay, a movement coach is how I work. This is a relationship that I need to have for basically approaching everything?
That's a really good question. I feel I didn't go to drama school, and it's not that I fell into acting, because I was always passionate about it. It's something I wanted to do, but I didn't have any specific training. So I suppose a part of my whole pursuit has been finding and refining a process. And that's been a pretty linear thing, and it shifts entirely depending on the character you're playing. But there have been gear change moments, and one of those moments was The Theory of Everything, where James Marsh, our wonderful director, after I was cast, said, this does kind of live or die in the performance. And I was like, oh,
no pressure.
No pressure. But what came with that was something that I hadn't had before, which was the confidence to ask for help. And I looked back to, I'd done a film called My Week with Marilyn with Michelle Williams. In that, Michelle had chosen to adopt the technique that Marilyn Monroe had used, which was have a voice coach, a movement coach, an acting coach, like the Strasbourg figure in Marilyn's life. And so I decided with Theory of Everything to do that. I worked with Julia Wilson-Dixon, a wonderful now sadly she's passed, but a brilliant vocal coach. And I met several movement coaches, dancers, and I'll never forget those meetings, because I was kind of like, I was terrified about playing Stephen Hawking. And I would say to them, how would you guys go about it? I have no idea how to do this. And many of the dancers, they said, or the movement coach said, well, try putting your hands like this and move like this. And Alex, this wonderful dancer she had worked on World War Z, she'd done some of the movement for the zombies in World War Z. But other than that, she hadn't done any film. And she said, well, just imagine that your pelvis is Mercury, and now try and shift that Mercury to one side. And so it was all very internal, weirdly, and some of the images I could connect to. Anyway, that was the start of our relationship. And then, of course, dancers are artists. And even though she hadn't come from the world of acting, her instincts were just beautiful. And until that point, I'd never had someone that I worked with in preparing for film, and had always been kind of in a vacuum, really, which is such an odd thing about filmmaking. You know, you can never have said the words aloud with anyone else until you meet that actor who's playing your mother, and 5 minutes later you're meant to have developed a relationship. So Alex has been quite an important person in my life for many years now, and she was brilliant. I did one day of work with her on The Good Nurse, and in the book of The Good Nurse they described this character I was playing, Charlie Cullen, as looking like a question mark. And we watched loads and loads, and now that's an interesting thing for an actor to kind of run with. But it's very surface, you know, it's like, oh, look like a question mark. What is that? A bend of some description. And we watched a load of footage of Charlie, Alex and I together, and she said it's like all of his trauma is here, and it's as if he's held up like a cloak from the back of his, and that was something emotional that I could play with that sort of altered the physicality.
Well, because the interesting thing with Day of the Jackal is this guy, like, first of all, you're not getting that deep kind of psychological resonance because he's a cipher, but there's so much stillness. It's not as much about the way he moves as the way he doesn't move. I mean, literally as a sniper, but also, like, you know, in a conversation on a park bench, like, and stillness is movement in a way, you know, that's a choice as well. And I'm just curious about how that became is that part of his cipherness, or is that something else that you brought to it, that stillness was so essential?
I felt that his stillness was going to be everything. I think that kind of stemmed from the snipers that I met and hearing about the specificity of what that process is. And the breath, really. You know, when you take a shot from a sniper rifle, you have the tip of your finger on the trigger and you take an in-breath. And you breathe out once. You take another in-breath. And you breathe out the second time. And at this end of the second out-breath, this tiny movement of your finger. So it's all sort of playing in something that has a fluidity to it, but is rooted in not moving the gun, honestly.
Yeah.
And also patience and economy. And that did feel like a way in, but also because he is so opaque and because he is so, you know, I feel that as a character, he was going to be alone until something shifted in his life. But that stillness was something that also was something I hadn't particularly dived into much.
Yeah.
And I found it intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of your work has been so physical, but I wondered if that just staying still like that is hard in some way, just kind of shutting off all of your other actor receptors and saying, no, it's all going to be in something else.
I don't know. I feel like certainly in Theory of Everything, for example, the elements when Stephen wasn't able to move, you know, you became so conscious of all of the emotional manifestation being in your eyes. And of course, screen work is beautiful for that. And that allowing the breath when you're in front of a camera of really letting that kind of symbiosis with the cameraman to that stillness is enough, provided the thought is there. That's something I'm still learning, you know, and still trying to sit with, because otherwise sometimes you feel like you've got to do something and it's just bullshit.
Yeah,
It's much worse.
Well, that's like the amateur actor thing, right? Is you feel like you have to put it all out there. And, you know, sometimes when I talk to actors, it feels like the whole process of building a career as an actor is doing less until you get down to what actually needs to be there.
And having faith in the essence of what it is, rather than having, you know, ever to indicate that. But it's But there's a weird thing about acting on television or film that you, particularly when you're doing something so quiet and so intimate, that there are 40 people standing 3 inches away, and I found one of the things, on the Jackal was, stillness on set and quietness on set is important. But when the scenes of that silence, you kind of or you're trying to focus, and of course when you're focusing down a barrel at a target, the reality of shooting is that you are in a warehouse on the outskirts of Budapest. There's definitely no target, and you're not really looking down a barrel. So the sort of levels of concentration are kind of exacerbated, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, I think I saw that this is like the first TV series you've made in, well over a decade. But the line between TV and film keeps blurring. You had a couple projects come out that were films that were only released on streaming because it was the pandemic. There's just been such a fluidity there. Like, how have you felt about that blurring of the lines? Was it a decision for you to go back to television in some way? Or did that just feel like the natural thing to do? If you want to make a drama about grown-ups, mostly they're on television these days. What was that process like?
I always sort of think there's nothing particularly strategic about the way that I've navigated my way through the tumultuous waters of being an actor. The truth be told, I purely rely on instinct, and I was sent these scripts, the first 3 of them. I just couldn't stop turning the pages. And it was exactly the genre that I love. I grew up watching these kind of 70s thrillers. I'd always loved the old school Bonds that were about the gadgetry, but in a kind of lo-fi way, in a sort of analog way. And this, for me, felt completely contemporary, but also it had that fun in it, honestly. It had that kind of delight in spycraft, and that felt also of another era. And also, I mean, it was an actor's playground. It's just a dream of a part for an actor to play, because you get to do all that stuff that, why you get into acting as a kid, because you enjoy changing the way your voice sounds and the way you look, and so it ticked all of those boxes. But so I didn't consciously think about TV, honestly. I just went, this is undeniable. But I also love TV, and I like some of the, those actors I get most kind of starstruck by are the ones who've sat in my living room and I've lived with for a year, 2 years, 3 years on end, and I love what you're able to do across an extended period to really, as I feel like television is more and more has faith in audiences, you can place something here and there can be no catharsis on it till 6 episodes later.
Sure. Well, there's this response. I think I saw that the ratings and numbers for this have been very good so far. There's been good audience response. You get this feedback from television that, like, at film you have box office, but, if you're making something that's smaller, that doesn't really tell you anything. Like, I don't know what audience feedback means to you. As a theater person, I would imagine it means something, but it feels like there's a little bit more of a conversation that you can have in a show like this than in some of the ways that movies have been released in the last 10 years.
You're totally right. It's such a weird thing because, the way that I can kind of gauge whether something is connecting or not is when you walk down the street. And since, the day of the Jackal came out last week, people want to volunteer to talk to you about it. And you get a sense of whether something is hitting a bit of or connecting to people. And I love it. And I love that people seem to be reacting to the piece in the way that I reacted to the script.
Do you get the sense that people are afraid of you in a way that they weren't before? Because they watched the show.
Come on. All you have to do is do like one. I mean, I was, there was definitely, I wish I could be as kind of, I did try to take away from him. Like, I'm such a, I flap in life. I'm always chasing my tail. What's that expression about haste and speed, less haste, more speed or something, I'm the opposite of that. And I'm always sort of rushing around and finishing things slightly ineptly. And I did really, particularly that scene in the first episode of The Jackal when he's putting the gun together. Yeah. And I so wanted it to feel like a dance almost. But it took me weeks of working with that prop to, and then actually, and days of shooting it, because it was about sort of 20 hours of footage, because it would be, oh fuck, as he said. But so I've
So
tried to
lessons
take
in
from the
precision.
Jackal.
Yeah.
Yeah, lessons in economy, lessons in take the breath. Like, that's what I've learned from this sociopath.
You and I have kids about the same age. That's always kind of the juggle of when am I going to be away from home for?
How old are your kids, Katey?
6 and almost 6 and 8. I think I seem to
Wow, it's
believe
exactly the same.
So there's the deciding to be away from kids part of it, but when I talk to actors, also there's like the work is what you are. Like your family life is important to you, but you got to keep going back to work and you got to find that part of yourself. So just like what has that balance been like for you in parenthood of, saying yes to this or anything else to say like this is how I feed that part of me that's also really important.
It's been ever changing. When Hannah and I got married, it was, I said, look, this is what the life is, and it's completely nomadic. And Hannah is much more free spirited than I am. Was like, great, we'll travel, together. And we were like, when we had kids, we would travel together, and we could for a while.
Yeah.
But now, of course, that thing kicks in where the kids are in school, and then they've just started a new school, and they've made their friends, and to up them and move them to Hungary for 6 months or to New York for another 4 months just feels. And the great thing I always say about, I have a few friends, we all started out together, and I'm sort of auditioning for things in LA, and we've been lucky in that we've all had a certain amount of success. But one of the great things about that is that you have pals who you've known for a long time who you can go, how are you doing it? Like, how are you managing this? Because how are we not going to screw our kids up? And how are we, and what is the best choice? But I don't have any answers. And it's funny you should bring that up because it's something that I've been, wrestling with for the past couple of days, particularly doing cabaret in New York was being away. Hannah and the kids came up for a long time, but you're living like a monk. You go to do the show every night, but from the second you wake up in the morning, your head is filled, and it's a pretty selfish existence to do it well,
Sure.
And I thought long and hard about that, about whether it was right to take it to New York, but because it had kind of been my baby, I felt like we had to see it through.
Yeah. Well, there's also like if you are not feeding your creative self, if you are not like, are you serving your kids by denying yourself the things that make you feel like a whole person? I talk to working moms about this a lot too. Like you want them to see you working and see what you can do, and that's like the eternal balance that nobody ever figures out.
Completely, and which weirdly brings us back to the Jackal because you've got two characters who are sort of work obsessed,
I know,
and who are sort of meticulous and perhaps better at being assassins and gun specialists than they are at being parents.
Yeah. Well, I was noticing on the Jackal that this is the first time you've had a producing credit on anything. You've got an executive producer credit. And obviously that title can really vary in what it does. But it made me wonder if kind of more control on that creative side of things was something you're interested in, if that just happens to be on this one, or if that might be what the next 10 years look like, that you have more of a hand in what these projects are.
Yeah, I mean, I dipped into it with cabaret because that was something that I sort of helped put together in London. And obviously theatre is a very different beast, but trusting one's instincts and working those skills you've accrued over the years, I found intriguing there. And when I signed on to do the Jackal, you never know with these things nowadays. It's definitely a thing that actors become exec producers, and what is that? Is that a cosmetic thing? And the answer is there are no rules. No one tells you, this is what your input is. But one thing became particularly clear to me because I hadn't done television in a long time. But this is a British-made show, and we don't have showrunners here. So a few days after I'd signed on, I was like. So Ronan Bennett was writing it, and he lived in Cadiz, and we had Carnival in London, we had Sky, we had Peacock, we had Universal making it. I was like, we had a producer, we had 4 directors, and I was like, so who's in charge? Like, whose vision is this? And everyone was like, well, it's kind of everyone's, and I was like, cool. But what became interesting was Lashana, who was also a producer. You sort of become the glue between the episodes. And we, the two of us, were both meticulous and loved the precision of it, but were granular the whole way through, I suppose. So you'd be coming home and watching the rushes in seeing assemblies and then working on music and the marketing. And then particularly, actually, it was something that we had that started on the Good Nurse for me, a bit on Theory and Danish Girl, but particularly on the Good Nurse, when we'd had an amazing experience making the Good Nurse, Jessica and I. Tobias Lindholm is a wonderful and brilliant man, and the way he worked was very team oriented. And after we finished it, it went to Netflix, and we didn't know any of the people who are now putting it out into the world. So, I mean, so we sort of asked to have a Zoom call with all of the heads of the departments whose job it was to now put it out in the world, and to meet them, because quite often you're kept at an arm's length. And we basically had this Zoom call in which we talked about what an extraordinary experience we'd had making it, how passionate we were about it, how we wanted to get behind it, so we could now start having individual relationships with these people from the different departments. And that put me in good stead for the Day of the Jackal, which was complex in its many cooks. There were many stakeholders in it. But the thing that became clear to me is that those boring things can get lost in translation in texts and emails. At some point, you've all got to get on on a call together or a Zoom together and wrestle things through. But quite often, I think when actors are exec producers, they're sort of people think they can't have those conversations, whereas Lashana and I were very much up for them.
Yeah. So it sounds like the answer is yes, you've learned a lot and are going to keep doing this. And you can't go back to not knowing how all this stuff works, right?
You need the one-word answers. I don't.
But it sounds like you kind of got to it at the end, that that's how your brain works now.
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the answer is yes. But that's also to say that there are, and I'm developing, one or two things, but I also love working for auteurs or directors in which you're in no way playing that role. You're a gun for hire, but it's nice being able to sort of juggle those things.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, you think of, you have an Oscar win at some point in your career, and then you have the power that you didn't have previously. And this is stuff you could have jumped into. You could have started your own production company and made all your shots. But it sounds like you've spent a decade learning a little bit more about what it is that you want. And now you're in a position where you can do that. You still got the power, but you kind of built it up a little bit more in that time.
But the other thing that shifted is what happened before Theory of Everything and afterwards. Is before I was an actor who would audition for anything that was sent my way, and if I got it, I did it. Pretty much. I mean, and then Theory of Everything came and changed that, and you became someone who was a financeable asset, and so suddenly you have choice, and that turns overnight. Rather than I would be used to getting a script from my agent saying, it's the sequel to Elizabeth, Kate Blanchett, Jeffrey Rush, Shaker Kapoor in it. There's a part here they want you to audition for. And I'm like, wow, well, if, Kate and Jeffrey and, Clive Owen think it's great, I should be so lucky to be, the people whose names are attached to things almost would make the choice for you. And then suddenly you become one of those people whose instinct helps get things out into the world.
You have to learn your gut more.
You're not necessarily educated in that choice.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? You sort of have to refine or learn your taste. And that's been an interesting experience, I suppose.
Well, yeah. I mean, and you have that, and you have something where you're sustaining your career for a long time with a franchise that's bigger than you, but you're able to build your taste in the meantime, because when you're a working actor, your taste doesn't matter. I never really thought about that when you become the person who can get the movie made, your gut matters so much more than it did before that.
Exactly. But the other thing that I find interesting is about the work-life balance of friends who have production companies, and you can get set up at studios with a deal and all this. And I am someone that when I'm committed to something, I'm all in. I know friends who can be juggling, developing 6 or 7 projects, but then my whole thing is, what if one of those projects that you've developed, suddenly you get a call from Spielberg, Paul Thomas Anderson, and you're like, oh, well, that whole thing was going one way. How do you sort of pull out of that or commit to? And also, you've got to start managing people. And I find when I'm just doing my job of acting in something, or maybe exec producing something I'm part of, and being a dad and a husband, it's all consuming, and so the idea of where you find the time to then manage people and is sort of at the moment is not something I have the capacity for. And I'm really impressed with people who can.
Yeah. I have sometimes said I want to have a podcast that's just sitting down with people and being like, what do you do every day? What's the first thing you do? How many hours you just spend on this project? Because I can't, people like Ron Howard, who produce 5 things a year, I can't figure out how they do it.
Or Ridley Scott.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Ridley Scott, who like a film a year, like he produced a TV series I did years ago called Pillars of the Earth. He's also got his whole like advertising arm. And I suppose the answer is delegating beautifully, but I may also be a control freak.
Well, and if you're Ridley Scott having a like inhuman amount of energy well into your 80s, like we should all be so lucky.
Lucky, exactly.
This show is edited by Brett Fuchs and co-produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thanks again to my co-host, Matt Patches. Get the Prestige Junkie newsletter by going to theankler.com and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, where you can watch a video version of much of this podcast, as well as on Apple or anywhere else you get your podcasts. We will see you next week.